Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. This is Dave. It's episode 364. And this is the last numbered episode for 2024. Ta-da! Yeah, well, there we go. 2024 is wrapped up. And I want to give you a challenge going into 2025. I'm giving you an actual challenge that I want you to try to do on an upcoming episode in the new year. And if you haven't even started podcasting yet, perfect. Then I want you to try this yourself. And this is a test. And there's no pass or fail, but I do want you to try this. It's the 30-second challenge. And it's the Essential Podcast Intro Challenge. What can you say in 30 seconds? And I'll explain to you why it's important and why you should do this, because I think this is really going to help your show. It's really going to help when a new listener comes to your podcast. Happy to have you here. You ready? Here we go. So if you're new here, welcome to the How to Podcast series. Glad to have you here. My name is Dave. We've talked in the past about the importance of a good intro and a great outro, and the fact that an intro should be more focused on new listeners than current listeners for one important reason. We'll talk about that. And that your outro should be focused on your community, your active listeners, the people who know, love you, and trust you. They've been to your podcast before. They listen to every episode. Those are your main focused core listeners. Your outro should be geared towards your community. So intro, new people, outro, community. Okay? There's a reason for that. Intros, people are going to come to your podcast as new listeners on any episode at any time. So if you do a bad job at your intros, you're going to miss an opportunity for new ears pressing play. They don't know you from anybody. They don't know about anything about the show. They've never heard your podcast before. And they're coming through the door, and you have one shot to capture their attention. So your intros should be focused on new listeners. Doesn't mean you're ignoring everybody else, but you should always capture the hearts and minds and ears of a new listener, and that should be your main focus for every intro. That's the most important thing to keep in mind. Intros are for new listeners, primarily. Now, why are outros more for community members? Because a new listener may or may not listen to the entirety of your podcast as a first-time listen. They might not stick around, okay? They haven't invested in you yet. They haven't really decided that you are their person. So, and your podcast may not be their podcast yet. It could happen. But right now, first time listen, they might stick around for some of this, but they might leave. They're not committed to you yet. There's no relationship yet. No bond has been created. But a listener that has been in love with you from the first time they heard play on your podcast, they have been with you the whole time. They signed up for your newsletter. They follow you on social. They follow you on the podcast app of their choice. They know about every new episode before you have to tell them about it. These people love you. They don't need to have an outro that is convincing them to do the thing they've already done. They are there and ready for you to steer them on a pathway to engagement instead of a call to action, a pathway to engagement towards something that's going to benefit them, not you. Make sure that your endings are focused on your community, because your new listener will probably never hear the ending of the podcast. So the people that stick to the end, you know who you are. Those are the people that you want to focus your ending on. So that's not the time for subscribe and follow and do all those things. If you watch any YouTube video, what do? The very beginning, they focus on the subscribe and follow and hit the bell and all that, and then they get into the content. They do that on purpose, because on YouTube, it's all about that first 30 seconds. Bang, you got to be ready. Even 10 seconds. If you can't capture the audience within the first couple seconds of somebody pressing play on YouTube, they're gone. So in audio podcasting, non-YouTube world, we also then need to learn that our first 30 seconds, super important. And the thing I'm finding is when I work with podcasters is they kind of take their sweet time in the beginning of their podcast to get to anything meaningful that a new listener and a current listener would either find impactful, with enjoyment, and captivating enough to stick around. So I think we lose a lot of people at the beginning. And if you look at on Apple, if you sign into your Apple dashboard specific to the Apple platform, or Spotify for Creators, now called Spotify for Creators, you can see any episode where people started listening. Everybody starts at 100% because everybody starts at the beginning. And you can see if they stay and how long they stay before they drop off and leave your show. You want to make that as long as possible. If you can get 100%, wow. But many people are going to see in the first few minutes, people will bounce, they'll leave. And there's a reason why. And we need to unpack that so we can have a longer engagement play with our listeners to the end of every episode as long as possible. That's going to help our podcast grow. And that's something you can do. So I want to give you the 30-second podcast challenge for 2025 as you prepare your next episode or your new episode. And here's a challenge that I want you to do. Okay? If you don't have your own podcast yet, then do this to a different podcast. Do it to my podcast. I'm fine. But pick a podcast, and I want you to do the 30-second challenge. So you're not exempt from this. If you don't have a show yet, you can still participate, and I'd love for you to try this. If you have a show, you've been doing your own podcast for a while, then I want you to do this to your own podcast. But the big thing is I want you to listen to your podcast as if you were a new listener to your show. Hard to do when you know the content and you know everything about your podcast, and it's your baby. You think it's great. But I want you to listen as if you have no idea what this podcast is about, and put on new ears that are not podcast ears and listen to your show in a different way. Okay? The 30-second challenge. Okay? Here's what we want you to do. Is we want you to press play on an episode of your show, and again, if you don't have a podcast, on someone else's show, and let the play button go for 30 seconds. And at the end of 30 seconds, hit stop. That's it. That's the biggest part of the challenge. Get a stopwatch, look at the clock, whatever you need, but press play for 30 seconds and then hit stop. Don't listen to a single word after the 30-second mark. That's it. Can you do that? Can you listen to 30 seconds of a podcast? Now, for the people that you're listening to someone else's show or to your own show, that doesn't even count as a listen technically on most players because they're going to want like 60 seconds or more. So for the most part, it won't even count as an actual listen, so you're not gaining anything by this. You're not changing your numbers by doing this, but you're going to learn something about this in a 30-second time span that I really want you to focus in on. And I've got a bunch of different things I'm going to throw at you that are questions, but I want you to make note of what did you hear in the first 30 seconds of the podcast. What did you hear? Now, if you have 2 minutes of music before any spoken word comes out of your mouth, then this is going to be a complete failure. This is not going to work because you're not going to be able to answer any of these questions I'm going to throw at you. All the questions in the show notes as well. You don't need to write these down. They're right there for you. You can follow along as I go through these with you and as we comment on these. But there's 15 things that we're going to kind of talk about around that 30-second period of time. And what did you learn about this show? The big idea is in with that first 30 seconds that we have set the foundation for the show for our listeners. Remember that the majority of our new listeners are coming to this podcast with zero knowledge about you or your show. So in that first 30 seconds, they're making a listening decision similar to you going into a store, making a buying decision, or shopping online and making a purchasing decision to add to cart. Your listeners are trying to figure if they're going to add to cart your podcast or if they're just going to skip on through to the next thing. So that 30 seconds is super important. And I think we're giving away too much real estate and missing an opportunity by not doing the first 30 seconds the right way. So you're going to press play on a podcast, yours or someone else's. And in 30 seconds, you're going to hit stop. And then you're going to start answering some questions. Are you ready? Okay, you've listened to 30 seconds. If you need to, pause this podcast right now. Just hit pause. And then go pick a podcast and do that 30 seconds. And then when you're done, come back. I'll be waiting for you. Okay, you're back. So you did 30 seconds of my show, your own show, or someone else's show, and you listened to 30 seconds. Okay, here's some questions. Again, they're all listed in the show notes, so you don't have to write any of these things down. Just go look at the notes. They're right there on your phone. You don't have to go to a website and download a PDF. None of that stuff. It's right there on your phone. You can see this in real time and follow along on the conversation. It's right there in front of you. So grab your phone, pull it out, take a look at it. If you're not driving, hands on the wheels, 3 and 9, whatever it is, make sure your hands are on the steering wheel. But on your phone, if you have the opportunity to do so, look, all the questions are right there. So the first thing, what's the name of the show? You just listened to 30 seconds of a podcast. Your show, someone else's show, my show. What's the name of the podcast? In 30 seconds. Did you hear the name of the podcast? Now, I know, you're saying, Dave, it's in the name. I can see it on my phone. I can see it on the screen. Yeah, but did you hear the name of your show? Remember that your podcast is being transcribed. There's a transcription automatically on Apple now, but Spotify does it as well. YouTube does it, where your words are transcribed into actual text on the screen or on your phone screen or on the website. Your words are being transcribed. So if you don't say the name of your show, it's not showing up in any transcriptions. So if you say, welcome to the show, what show? Right? So, and again, some people listen from podcast to podcast to podcast. Their phone is in their pocket, on the counter. It's in a different room. And your show starts up and you're like, welcome to the show. What show? I just listened to a podcast about gardening, and now here's Dave talking about how to podcast. But I don't even know what show I'm on. So say the name of your show. Was the show name mentioned in that first 30 seconds? Yes or no? Was it clearly stated? The next one, did the host introduce themselves? Did the host tell you their name in the first 30 seconds? Do you know the name of the host? Do you know the name of the podcast? You just listened for 30 seconds. What do you know about the show? What about the podcast topic? The theme? Is the overall subject matter of the podcast evident? Do you have understanding of what this is all about in the first 30 seconds? What about the episode topic? Is there a specific focus for the episode mentioned at all in that first 30 seconds? In that first 30 seconds, is there a welcoming tone to the podcast? Do you feel like, like Cheers? I mean, that TV show Cheers, it was a bar and everyone knows your name and people would come in and they'd be like, hey, as you came through the door. Did you feel welcomed when you walked into this podcast and pressed play? Did you feel like you belonged, or did you feel like you were an alien? You're like, what's going on? Who are these people? And what are we talking about? How was the tone of the show? Does the introduction make you feel like you're invited as a new listener to join the conversation? How did you feel? What was the tone of the show? How did you feel? And in that first 30 seconds, was there any kind of value proposition to you as a listener? Was it a clear indication of what you're going to gain from this episode? Did you get that feeling? Now, again, we're like already 6 things in. Obviously, it's only 30 seconds. I get that. You're not going to get all of these. But did you get any of this in that first 30 seconds? Or are you still listening to music? See what I'm saying? Okay, 30 seconds. I know that sounds really, really short, but I'm telling you, there are people making decisions in 30-second increments about your show every single day. And if you don't address this or are not thinking about this when you hit record, you might be missing a huge opportunity with your podcast. So, is there a value proposition? Is there a reason why I should stick around? What about the target audience for this podcast? In that 30-second period of time, can listeners quickly determine if the podcast is for them? Like, do I feel like you're talking to me? Do you know who your target audience is as the host? Does that come across in that intro part, in that first 30 seconds? What about the podcast frequency? Again, I'm a new listener. I just been here for 30 seconds. I only know 30 seconds about you. Do I have any sense about how often this podcast is produced? Is it mentioned how often I get a new episode? Like, is that part of your 30 seconds? Again, remember, it's only 30 seconds. You can't cram all 9 of these things so far in 30 seconds. You're going to be like an auctioneer trying to get all these words in. I get that. But maybe none of these 9 things are in your first 30 seconds or in the podcast you listen to in that first 30 seconds. None of these 9 things have been addressed yet in that first 30 seconds. That makes me go, wait a minute, maybe we can do better. Okay? Now, how about the 10th one? What about the energy level of the podcast? Does the introduction capture the attention of the listeners and set the right mood? What is the energy level of the host? Is it like, hey, hi, welcome to the podcast. It's Monday, I'm supposed to do a podcast every Monday, so I don't know what we're going to do, but I'm here. Anyways, thanks for listening to the show. Oh, well, this week cut my grass, so that was fun. Lawnmower broke down and dog ran away again and truck didn't start. But anyways, welcome to the show. What is going on? What is that? Okay. What is the energy level? What are you bringing as the host? Whether it's the music, whether it's your voice, something. What is the tone? What is the energy level? What are you putting out there through your podcast? And it's super hard to do that when you're doing this by yourself, to imagine someone listening in the future to this. But you got to set the level. And I think if you have an interview, you as the host set the level of energy with your host, with your guest. As you host the show, your energy level will be matched by your guest. So if you come in really mild and quiet and kind of your guest is going to lower their energy level to yours because they don't want to be more energetic than you are, and they don't want to be less energetic than you are. They're going to match you. So you set the tone and the energy level for your podcast when you start the show. You got 30 seconds to convince me that your energy level's on point and we're in the right spot. What about any type of branding elements in that first 30 seconds? Are there consistent audio cues or music that define your show? So if I listen to episode 5 and episode 32 and episode 64, am I getting a consistent feel across all of these different episodes? I know we're going to grow, we're going to expand, we're going to get better at podcasting. But is there a consistent feel to the show over time? How does that feel in the first 30 seconds? Is your brand consistent? How about number 12? Your call to action, as I like to call it, my pathway to engagement. Now, this is more, again, in YouTube world, we'd want it up front because people are there. That's when we're going to ask them to smash the bell, subscribe, whatever, right? That's what's going to happen on a YouTube platform. In podcasting, we usually leave our calls to action, or again, pathway to engagement. We usually leave that to the end. But maybe you can throw something in near the beginning as well for a new person within that first 30 seconds. Hey, thanks for being here. Don't forget the website, blah, blah, blah. Let's jump into today. So something like that could be in somewhere, somehow, in those first 30 seconds. So what is it? Is there a prompt for listeners to subscribe or follow the show? Again, we're not trying to get all 12 of these in 30 seconds. That's impossible. But is there any of these happening at all? Out of these 12, we got 3 more to go. Out of these 12, did you hear any of that in that 30-second clip that you listened to? How about number 13? Is there an episode number or a season? Something that tells people what's current? Like, where are we in this world of your podcast? That's interesting to know. Again, remember, new listener, first time. If you don't have an episode number in your title, they don't know. They have no idea how many episodes you have. This is our first time here. They don't know anything about you. So if this is episode 500, they're like, holy cow, they have 500 episodes. That's either going to make them want to go back and listen, or they'll be like, there's no way. So at least they know that you've been around for a while. So is there any type of episode number or season identified in that first 30 seconds? What about the length of the episode? Is there any hint to how long this episode's going to be? I know. We can look at our phone and it'll tell us 12 minutes and 33 seconds. I know we could do that. But again, remember, my phone's in my pocket. My phone's in the car. My phone's in the seat beside me as I'm driving. I don't have time to reach over as your podcast starts and look and see, okay, 16 minutes and 38 seconds. I don't have time to, my eyes are on the road, I'm driving. So if you're jumping on and going, hey, welcome to this quick 5-minute episode today, we're talking about A, B, and C. Welcome to the How to Podcast series. My name is Dave. Boom. See, like we've got some of these elements within that first 30 seconds. Okay? We're all about connecting right away with our listener. And then if you have guests on your show, the introduction. Here's where I see a lot of podcasters who have guests on their show kind of get off on a tangent. They lose track of the immediacy of getting to it at the beginning. When you jump into your podcast, if you're going to talk about yourself for 5 minutes before you even acknowledge you have a guest on your show, if it's not clearly identified in the title that you have a guest and you're talking about topic A, I don't even know you have a guest. And your guest, if you're recording it live without editing, your guest is sitting there for 3 or 4 minutes listening to you talk about your book and your program and your course and your newsletter and my website. And don't forget to do the thing and also click here and do that and this. And eventually it's like, and Dave's on the show today. Oh, finally. And your guest is sitting there the whole time staring at the ceiling going, why am I here? Get to the guest. If your podcast is guest focused, get to the guest. That's why we're here. That's why they're here. Don't waste their time. My Living the Next Chapter podcast, author podcast, right? I'm not an author. I'm the host of the show. So I have nothing to contribute to this podcast from an author's perspective because I've never done it. My guest has, so let's get to them because that's why we're here. It's about the books that the author has written, not about the host interviewing the author. It's not about me. It's about them. So get to the guest quickly, right away. 30 seconds. Any mention of a guest? Is there? Did you get that when you pressed play on that episode? Again, go through the list that's in the phone and you're listening or wherever you're listening to this podcast. You'll see all 15 of these things identified for you. And again, I'm going to say it one more time. There's no way you're going to cram all 15 of these things into a 30-second intro. No way. There's no way. But if you don't have any of these 15 at all in your intro in that first 30 seconds, you might be missing an opportunity to land that listener. They might not stick around past that 30-second mark if none of these things are addressed. And if you can only get one, then get one. Pick one and see how it goes. See if you land more listeners by picking any one of these or any number of these and getting them as close to the beginning as possible so that when a new person comes to your podcast for the first time, knows nothing about you, knows nothing about your show. Somebody sent them, they somehow randomly stumbled over your podcast, somehow Google, Spotify, Apple, somebody somehow pointed them in your direction. They press play with no expectation that they're even going to like the show. You want to capture their attention with any one of these 15 things. I know it's challenging to include these elements into just 30 seconds, but the most crucial aspects, the show name, your host name, the name of the host, and the topic should be prioritized for your audience. The goal is to quickly orient new listeners and give them something compelling and a reason to continue listening to the show. We want phones in pockets. We want phones on passenger seats. We want phones in purses or bags or on the dresser or on the counter or on the table. We want phones put away in that first 30 seconds so that people stick around to hear every word of your podcast. And if you're spending 2 minutes with music at the beginning of the podcast for no reason at all, just because you think it's a good song, I'm telling you, I've heard a lot of crappy songs on podcasts, and I don't know what the host was thinking, but my gosh, I'm as quickly skipping through that as much as possible. If you are going to rely on your podcast listener to be on the skip button to get to the part where it's worth listening to your show, the more you do make them do that, the less chance they're going to stick around. So instead of 5 minutes of commercials for your podcast, instead of you rambling on about stuff that has nothing to do with the podcast, instead of 2 minutes of music for no reason, instead of silence, you're like, what happened? Where is everybody? You want to get that first 30 seconds. In real estate, it's all about location, location, location. You only want to buy the best place in the best location. That's what you want. And in your podcast, those first 30 seconds need to shine. So if you haven't done any of these 15 in the past, on your next episode, within your first 30 seconds, I need you to pick something from this list of 15 and try it. And maybe work your way through in the next 15 episodes and do each of these one at a time and see how it goes. But make that first 30 seconds count. Okay? I want you to try it, and then I want you to tell me how it went. Dave, I did the experiment. This is what I tried. This is the result. I'd love to hear that. Over at howtopodcast.ca, it's a SpeakPipe link right there. If you're old school and you love email, then send me an email. I'd love to read your thoughts. But you tried one of these 15 within the first 30 seconds, and here's the result. Do people stick around longer? Do people listen longer? Look at your stats. Look at your retention. If you don't know how to do any of that, reach out to me, howtopodcast.ca, calendar link on the website. Click it, and let's get together, and we'll look at your stats and analytics together. We'll pull up your Apple, we'll pull up your Spotify, and we'll go into an episode, and we'll look at retention together. And I'll give you some suggestions on how maybe we can do better and make people listen longer. Anytime that I can help you, I'd love to. And if you haven't even started your podcast yet, awesome. Then you're going to learn so much from this show. If you go back in time over the last 363 episodes, plus all the Daily Daves, plus all the other stuff that we've done on the show, there's a lot of content here to help you with your podcast. This is what we wanted this to be, a library of content that you can go back to anytime and learn, relearn, upgrade your skills as a podcaster. Start your show, continue your show, and grow your show in the future. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope that the podcasting tips that you get here help you in your journey. If you have any ideas for the show in the future, or you want to be a guest, howtopodcast.ca. Would love to talk to you. Thanks for being here. Happy New Year. That's right. This is almost the new year. I'll be thinking of you as we celebrate and bring in 2025. It's going to be a great year. You're going to have an amazing podcast. You're going to see some great things, meet amazing people because you have a show. I'm so proud of you that you're going to do this big thing in 2025, and I'd love to walk with you. Thank you for listening to the show. Get out there, share your voice. You are the only person who can do your show, and you're the only person who can reach the people that you can reach. So start your show. Get out there, 2025. Let's do our podcast and do it right. Thanks for listening. Happy New Year. So I get asked quite often, usually at the end of a podcast, like right now, Dave, how can we help you? Like, how can we, as a listener, like, support the show? Can we come rake your leaves? Can we cut the grass, shovel the snow? Watch your dog, help you move? What can we do? Clean your dishes? Oh, that'd be interesting. Well, if you can't do that because, you're in Poland, maybe you can help us by supporting us with our Buy Me a Coffee. It's right there on our website. And, it just will help us to, A, stay fueled because, we drink a lot of coffee around here. And it helps the show. So if you want to help us, it's out of the goodness of your heart. I can tell you that listening to the podcast to this point, you've already helped us so much. But I do have people saying, Dave, I'd love to to give back something small, even just to the show. Buy Me a Coffee link is on our website at howtopodcast.ca. And you can support the show that way. It would mean a lot to have you on our team supporting what we do here. If you find value in the show, then that's great. Share the show, tell somebody about it. And when somebody says, Dave, I want to start a podcast, who should I check out? Oh, you should go check out the How to Podcast series because of all the great co-hosts and all the things that happen here, the meetups, everything. And I would appreciate that. And then fill her a cup once in a while if you can. But again, thank you so much for being here and supporting the How to Podcast series. Take care. Talk soon.